Rain blurred the city into shadows and neon when a child's voice shattered the silence. Small, certain, and impossible. "Daddy!" The boy ran toward him through the crowd, arms outstretched, while his mother's face drained of all color. Dante Russo, the man whose name made grown men flinch, stood frozen as a 5-year-old stranger collided with his legs, and looked up at him like he'd been waiting his whole life for this moment. And then Dante saw it. The scar on the woman's trembling hand. The same mark his dead wife bore the night she was taken from him. Welcome back to Mafia Folklore. Before this story begins, tell me something. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It helps us know how far the legend of the Mafia travels tonight. Now, let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that night, turning the Brooklyn streets into rivers of reflected light. Dante Russo moved through it like he owned the storm itself. Collar up, hands in the pockets of his black coat, eyes scanning every doorway, every shadow, every face that passed him on the sidewalk. He was hunting. Not with guns. Not yet. But with the kind of cold, methodical attention that had kept him alive in a world where men like him didn't get second chances. The Volkov Bratva had been moving product through his territory for weeks now, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before he pushed back. Tonight, Dante was gathering names, faces, patterns. He didn't need to draw blood to send a message. Sometimes, just being seen was enough. The neighborhood knew him. The bodega owners nodded as he passed. The girls smoking outside the corner store looked away. Even the stray dogs seemed to sense the weight he carried and gave him space. Dante Russo wasn't feared because he was loud or reckless. He was feared because he was precise, because when he made a decision, it was final, and because 5 years ago, he'd learned what happened when you let your guard down. He turned the corner onto Mulberry Street, where the old Italian bakery still smelled like bread even in the rain, and that's when he heard it. A child's laughter, high and bright and entirely out of place in a neighborhood like this, at an hour like this. Dante's gaze shifted, tracking the sound to a woman standing beneath the awning of a closed laundromat. She was young, late 20s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a messy bun and a worn coat that had seen too many winters. She was holding the hand of a little boy, trying to coax him out of a puddle he was gleefully stomping in. "Marco, come on!" she said softly, urgently. "We need to go." Her voice carried an edge Dante recognized, fear trying to sound like patience. He kept walking, intending to pass them without a second glance. He had work to do. But then the boy looked up, and everything stopped. The child's eyes locked onto Dante's face with a kind of recognition that didn't make sense. Wide, dark, unblinking. And then, before his mother could stop him, the boy tore his hand free and ran, straight toward Dante. "Daddy!" The word hit him like a bullet. The boy was fast, his small feet slapping against the wet pavement, his arms reaching up as if Dante would catch him, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Dante stood frozen, every instinct screaming at him to move, to step back, to understand what the hell was happening, but he didn't. He couldn't. Because the boy collided with his legs and wrapped his arms around his knees and looked up at him with a smile so pure, so certain, that it cracked something deep in Dante's chest. "I knew it was you," the boy whispered, breathless and delighted. "Mama said you'd come back." Dante's throat closed. Behind the boy, the woman had gone bone white. She was running now, stumbling in her panic, and when she reached them, She grabbed the child with both hands and pulled him back so hard the boy yelped. "I'm so sorry," she gasped, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. He doesn't—" But Dante wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at her hands. Her left hand, trembling as it gripped the boy's shoulder, bore a scar that made the world tilt beneath him. A burn mark, jagged and old, running from her wrist to the base of her thumb. The kind of scar that came from fire, from pain, from something deliberate. The exact same scar his wife had carried. Dante's pulse roared in his ears. Sophia! Sophia had been burned during an interrogation 6 years ago, before they were married, back when she'd gotten caught in the wrong place during a territorial dispute. She'd survived. Barely. And she'd carried that scar until the night she died. Until the night they killed her. And now this woman, this stranger, had the same mark. "Who are you?" Dante's voice came out low, dangerous, the kind of tone that made people confess things they didn't mean to say. The woman flinched. She pulled the boy closer, shielding him with her body even though her hands were shaking. "No one," she whispered. "We're no one. Please. Just let us go." But the boy was squirming, reaching for Dante again, his small voice insistent. "Mama, it's him! It's Daddy! You said he'd find us!" "Marco, stop!" she hissed, and there were tears in her eyes now, streaming down her face as she backed away. "I'm sorry. He's confused. He's just a child. Please." Dante should have let them go. He should have turned around, filed this away as some bizarre coincidence, and continued his hunt for the Volkov runners. But he didn't. Because the boy's eyes were the same shade as his own. Because the scar on the woman's hand was impossible. Because something in her terror felt less like guilt and more like someone who'd been running for a very long time. "What's your name?" Dante asked, his gaze locked on hers. She hesitated, swallowed hard. "Elena." "Elena what?" "Moretti." "Italian, of course. And the boy?" "Marco." Her voice cracked. "His name is Marco." Dante crouched down slowly, bringing himself to the boy's eye level. The child stopped squirming and stared at him with that same unsettling certainty, like he was looking at someone he'd known his whole life. "Marco," Dante said quietly, "why do you think I'm your daddy?" The boy tilted his head, confused by the question. "Because you are. Mama told me. She said you couldn't find us, but that one day you would. And now you did." Dante's chest tightened. He looked up at Elena. She was crying now, silent and desperate, her scarred hand pressed over her mouth, as if she could take back everything her son had just said. "I don't know you," Dante said, his voice colder now. "I've never seen you before in my life." "I know," she whispered. "I know. Please, just forget this happened. Forget us." But Dante didn't forget things, especially not things that didn't make sense. He stood slowly, his mind already working through possibilities. A con, a setup, a rival faction using a child to get close to him. It wouldn't be the first time someone had tried, but the scar was too specific, too intimate. "You need to come with me," Dante said. Elena's eyes went wide. No, please." "I'm not asking. Please, he's just a boy. He's innocent. If you want to hurt someone, hurt me, but don't. I'm not going to hurt him." Dante cut her off, his voice hard. "But you're going to tell me how you got that scar. And you're going to tell me why your son thinks I'm his father." Elena looked like she might run. But Marco was still staring up at Dante with that heartbreaking trust, and she must have known she wouldn't get far. Not in this neighborhood. Not from him. She closed her eyes, nodded once. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." Dante pulled out his phone and sent a single text. Within 2 minutes, a black car pulled up to the curb, and one of his men stepped out, opening the back door without a word. Dante gestured toward it. "Get in." Elena hesitated, then lifted Marco into her arms and climbed inside. Dante followed, settling into the seat across from them, his gaze never leaving her face. As the car pulled away from the curb and disappeared into the rain-soaked night, Marco rested his head on his mother's shoulder and smiled at Dante like he'd just found something he'd lost. And Dante, for the first time in 5 years, didn't know what the hell he was supposed to do next. Have you ever met someone and felt like you knew them before you'd even spoken? Like fate had been pulling you toward that moment your whole life? Tell us in the comments. The safe house was quiet. Too quiet. Dante had brought them to a place on the edge of Red Hook, a neighborhood where questions weren't asked and faces weren't remembered. The building looked abandoned from the outside, cracked brick, boarded windows, graffiti climbing the walls like ivy. But inside, it was clean, secure. The kind of place where someone could disappear for a while. Elena sat on the edge of a worn leather couch, Marco curled against her side, half asleep. She hadn't said a word since they'd arrived 20 minutes ago. Just held her son and stared at the floor like she was trying to decide whether to run or confess. Dante stood by the window, arms crossed, watching the street below. His men were positioned at every corner. No one was getting in, and no one was getting out. He turned slowly, his gaze settling on the woman. "Start talking." Elena flinched but didn't look up. Her scarred hand rested protectively on Marco's back, fingers trembling slightly. "What do you want me to say?" "The truth." Dante's voice was calm, controlled, deadly. "Starting with how you got that scar." Her jaw tightened. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then quietly, "I was a nurse." Dante waited. 5 years ago, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "I worked at a clinic in Sunset Park, late nights mostly. We treated people who couldn't afford hospitals. People who didn't ask questions." She swallowed hard. "One night, men came in. They had a woman with them. She was hurt, burned, bleeding. They said if I told anyone, they'd kill me." Dante's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "What happened to the woman?" Elena's eyes finally lifted to meet his, and there was something raw in them, something haunted. "She died." The words hung in the air like smoke. "But not before she gave birth." Dante's breath stopped. Elena's voice cracked. "She was pregnant? They didn't know? Or maybe they didn't care. She went into labor in that clinic, and I tried to save her. I tried, but she'd lost too much blood. She was dying, and she knew it." Dante's hands curled into fists at his sides. "She begged me," Elena whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "She begged me to save her baby." To get him out of there, to keep him safe. She said his father didn't know he existed, that if they found out, they'd use him. Kill him. Her voice broke. "So I did." Silence. Marco stirred in his sleep, and Elena pulled him closer, her scarred hand smoothing his hair. "I burned myself," she said softly, "with the same iron they'd used on her. So I'd have the same mark. So if anyone ever came looking, they'd think I was her, that I was the one who escaped." She looked at Dante with red-rimmed eyes. "And then I ran. I took the baby, and I ran, and I've been hiding ever since." Dante's mind was racing, pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Sophia. Sophia had been taken 5 years ago, kidnapped during a retaliation hit by the Volkov Bratva. They'd sent him her wedding ring 2 weeks later, along with a message that she was dead. He'd torn the city apart looking for her body, for proof, for revenge, but he'd never found her because she'd been alive, pregnant, and no one had told him. "Why didn't you come to me?" Dante's voice was low, dangerous. "If you knew who she was, if you knew the boy was mine." "I didn't know." Elena's voice cracked with desperation. "I didn't know who you were. She never said your name. She just said his father was powerful, that his enemies would kill the baby if they knew he existed. I was terrified. I didn't know who to trust." "So you kept him." Dante's gaze dropped to the sleeping boy. "You raised him for 5 years. I kept him safe." Elena's voice turned fierce, protective. "I loved him. I gave him everything I had, and I would do it again." Dante stared at her. At the woman who'd sacrificed everything to protect a child that wasn't hers, who'd scarred herself, hidden herself, lived in fear, all to keep a promise to a dying woman, his son. Marco was his son. The realization hit him like a punch to the chest. All this time, all these years, he'd had a child and he hadn't known. Dante turned away, his jaw clenched so tight it ached. He wanted to put his fist through the wall, wanted to find every man who'd been in that room with Sophia and make them pay in ways they couldn't imagine. But first, he needed to be sure. "I want a DNA test," he said, his voice flat. Elena nodded, exhausted. "Okay. And you don't leave this building until I have answers." "Okay." Dante pulled out his phone and made a call. One of his people, a doctor he trusted, would be here within the hour. In the meantime, he needed air, space, something to keep him from falling apart in front of this woman and the boy who might be everything he'd lost. He moved toward the door, but Marco's small voice stopped him. "Where are you going?" Dante turned. The boy had woken up, rubbing his eyes, looking at him with that same unshakable certainty. "I'll be back," Dante said, the words feeling foreign in his mouth. Marco smiled. "Promise?" Dante's throat tightened. He glanced at Elena, who was watching him with a mixture of fear and something else. Hope, maybe, or desperation. "Yeah," Dante said quietly. "I promise." And then he left before the boy could see the cracks forming in the armor he'd spent 5 years building. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the streets were still slick and dark. Dante stood on the fire escape, breathing in the cold air, trying to steady himself. His phone buzzed. A message from his second-in-command, Luca. Volkov's men were spotted near the clinic in Sunset Park. "You want us to move?" Dante stared at the message. The clinic, where Sophia had died, where Marco had been born. They were still looking. After 5 years, they were still looking for the boy. Dante typed back a single word. Wait, he needed to think. Needed to plan. Because if the Volkovs found out Marco existed, they wouldn't just come for the boy. They'd come for everyone. When Dante returned to the safe house an hour later, the doctor had already arrived. Marco sat on the couch, wide awake now, swinging his legs and chattering about his favorite dinosaur, while the doctor swabbed the inside of his cheek. Elena hovered nearby, arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. Dante met the doctor's eyes. "How long?" 48 hours for results, maybe less if I push it." "Push it." The doctor nodded and packed up his kit, taking a second sample from Dante before leaving without another word. And then it was just the three of them. Marco looked up at Dante with bright, curious eyes. "Are you really my daddy?" Dante crouched down in front of him, the question pressing against his ribs like a knife. "I don't know yet, kid." "I think you are," Marco said matter-of-factly. "You have the same eyes as me. See?" He pointed to his own face, grinning. Dante's chest tightened. Elena's voice was soft behind him. "Marco, why don't you go pick out a book from the shelf? I'll read to you in a minute." The boy nodded and scampered off, leaving Dante and Elena alone. She sat down on the couch, exhausted, and for the first time, Dante really looked at her. Not as a suspect, not as a stranger, but as someone who'd done something impossibly brave and impossibly stupid and had somehow managed to keep his son alive. "Thank you," he said quietly. Elena looked up, surprised. "For keeping him safe," Dante continued, his voice rough. "For loving him." Her eyes filled with tears again, but she blinked them away. "He's a good kid. The best." "Yeah." Dante's gaze drifted to Marco, who was now flipping through a picture book with intense concentration. "He is." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The weight of everything unsaid hung between them. Grief, fear, gratitude, and something fragile that neither of them had a name for yet. Then Marco's voice rang out from across the room. "Mama! This one! Read this one!" Elena smiled despite herself, and Dante saw it. The way her whole face softened when she looked at the boy. The way she'd already given him everything. And Dante realized, with a clarity that terrified him, that if Marco really was his son, he wasn't just getting a child back. He was getting a family. A broken, impossible, dangerous family. But a family nonetheless. The first night was the hardest. Marco fell asleep quickly, curled up in one of the bedrooms with a stuffed dinosaur Elena had pulled from her worn backpack. She'd tucked him in with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 1,000 times, whispering something soft in Italian that Dante couldn't quite hear. When she came back to the living room, she looked hollowed out, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. Dante was at the small kitchen table, going through files on his laptop, surveillance photos, financial records, anything that might tell him who else knew about Marco. He didn't look up when Elena sat down across from him. "You should sleep," he said. "I can't." Her voice was flat, honest. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them finding us, taking him." Dante's fingers stilled on the keyboard. He finally looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the weight she'd been carrying alone for 5 years. The constant fear, the hypervigilance, the knowledge that one mistake could cost her everything. "They won't," he said quietly. "Not while I'm here." Elena's laugh was bitter, broken. "You don't understand. These people, they don't stop. They've been hunting us for years. Every time I think we're safe, something happens." "A man watching too long, a car that follows us. I've moved 7 times in 5 years. 7 times, and they always find us." Dante leaned back, his gaze sharpening. "The Volkovs." She nodded, her scarred hand trembling against the table. "I didn't know their name at first, but I learned. I had to. Your wife, Sophia, she said something before she died. She said they'd killed her because of a debt, a betrayal, that they wanted to erase everything she was." Dante's jaw tightened. He knew the story. Sophia's brother had stolen from the Bratva and disappeared, leaving Sophia to pay the price. Dante had been trying to negotiate her release when they'd sent him her ring. By then, it was already too late, or so he'd thought. They don't know Marco exists, Dante said, more to himself than to her. If they did, they would have already moved. They suspect. Elena's voice dropped to a whisper. Last year, someone broke into our apartment, tore it apart, didn't take anything, just left a message on the wall in Russian. I didn't know what it said, but I knew what it meant. They were getting close. What did it say? Elena swallowed hard. We know what you're hiding. The room went cold. Dante's mind raced through strategies, contingencies, ways to lock this down before it became a bloodbath. But underneath the tactical thinking was something raw. Rage at the men who'd made this woman and child live in terror. Rage at himself for not knowing, for not finding them sooner. You should have come to me, he said again, quieter this time. I told you, I didn't know who you were. And even if I did, she met his eyes, her voice steady despite the fear. Would you have believed me? A stranger showing up with a child claiming he was yours? Or would you have thought I was part of the trap? She was right. He would have suspected her, investigated her, maybe even hurt her if he'd thought she was working with his enemies. You did the right thing, Dante admitted, the words tasting like gravel. Keeping him hidden, keeping him safe. Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I tried. God, I tried so hard, but I'm tired, Dante. I'm so tired. And Marco deserves better than this. Better than running. Better than being afraid. He'll have it, Dante said, and the promise in his voice was absolute. I don't care what it takes. He'll be safe. You both will. Elena searched his face, looking for a lie, for doubt. But all she found was the same cold certainty that had kept Dante alive in a world where hesitation meant death. Why? She asked softly. You don't even know if he's yours yet. Dante looked toward the bedroom where Marco slept, and something shifted in his chest. Because he called me Daddy, and no one else in this world would dare. The DNA results came back 36 hours later. Dante was in the middle of a call with Luca, coordinating surveillance on the Volkovs' known locations, when his phone buzzed with the doctor's message. 99.9% match. He's yours. Dante stared at the screen, the words blurring as the reality settled over him like a second skin. He had a son who'd been alive this whole time, who'd taken his first steps without him, learned to talk without him, grew up believing his father would come back someday. And Dante hadn't even known to look. He ended the call with Luca without explanation and walked into the bedroom where Marco was playing with a set of toy cars Elena had bought from a corner store. The boy looked up, grinning. Want a race? Marco held up 2 cars, one red, one blue. Dante sat down on the floor, something he hadn't done in years, and took the blue car. Yeah, let's race. They played for 20 minutes, Marco's laughter filling the small room, bright and unguarded. And for those 20 minutes, Dante let himself forget about the bratva, the danger, the blood on his hands. He let himself be something he'd never thought he'd be again. A father. When Elena came in to check on them, she stopped in the doorway, her expression softening at the sight of Dante and Marco sprawled on the floor. Building a racetrack out of books and pillows. Dante looked up and met her eyes. It's confirmed, he said quietly. He's mine. Elena's breath hitched, her hand flying to her mouth. Relief and fear and something deeper crashed across her face all at once. What happens now? She whispered. Dante stood slowly, careful not to disturb Marco's track. He walked over to her, close enough that he could see the exhaustion etched into every line of her face. close enough to see the strength it had taken to survive this long. "Now," he said, his voice low and steady, "we stop running." Over the next 3 days, something unexpected happened. They became a unit. Dante moved them to a different safe house, larger, more secure, with his best men stationed outside. He brought in groceries, clothes for Marco, books to keep the boy entertained. Elena cooked meals with whatever ingredients Dante provided, and they ate together at a small table like a family that had been doing this for years instead of days. Marco attached himself to Dante with the single-minded devotion only a child could have. He followed him from room to room, asked endless questions about everything from Dante's watch to the scar above his eyebrow, and insisted on sitting next to him during meals. "Why do you have a phone that doesn't have games?" Marco asked one evening, poking at Dante's phone with a puzzled frown. "Because I use it for work," Dante replied, amused despite himself. "What kind of work?" Elena, cutting vegetables at the counter, tensed, but Dante just ruffled Marco's hair. "Boring work. The kind you don't need to worry about." Marco seemed satisfied with that answer and went back to coloring at the table. Later, after Marco was asleep, Elena found Dante on the fire escape, smoking a cigarette he'd borrowed from one of his men. "You're good with him," she said quietly, leaning against the doorframe. Dante exhaled smoke into the night. "I don't know what I'm doing." "Neither did I at first." She stepped outside, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. "But you figure it out. You just show up, love him, keep him safe. That's all he needs." Dante looked at her, this woman who'd given up everything to protect a child that wasn't hers, who'd loved Marco like he was her own, who'd taught him to be brave and kind despite the fear she carried every day. "You didn't have to do this," he said. "Any of it. You could have left him at a hospital, disappeared." Elena's eyes flashed. "No, I couldn't." "Why not?" "Because she asked me to." Her voice broke. "Your wife, Sophia, she looked at me with dying eyes and begged me to save her baby, to give him a life, and I promised her I would." "You don't break a promise like that." Dante's throat tightened. "She would have liked you." Elena smiled sadly. "I wish I could have known her, really known her, not just in those last moments." They stood in silence, the city humming below them, danger lurking in every shadow but held at bay, for now, by Dante's presence and the men he'd positioned like a fortress around them. "What happens when this is over?" Elena asked, her voice small. "When it's safe. What happens to me?" Dante turned to look at her fully, and there was something in his gaze she couldn't quite read. Something intense and careful and real. "You stay," he said simply. "Marco needs you, and so do I." Elena's breath caught. "Dante, I'm not asking you to be anything you're not," he continued, his voice low and rough. "But you're part of this now, part of him, and I don't take that lightly." Tears slipped down her cheeks, and she didn't bother wiping them away. "I don't know how to do this, how to be part of your world." "Neither do I," Dante admitted. "But we'll figure it out. Together." For the first time in 5 years, Elena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, they could stop running, that maybe they'd already found home. Have you ever had to protect something so precious you'd give up everything for it? What was it, and how far would you go? Tell us in the comments. The trap was set before Dante even knew the game had started. It began with a photograph. Luca arrived at the safe house just after dawn, his face grim, carrying a manila envelope he didn't want to open. Dante met him at the door, already sensing trouble from the tension in his second's jaw. "What is it?" Luca handed him the envelope without a word. Inside was a single photograph, printed on glossy paper, taken from a distance but clear enough to make Dante's blood run cold. It showed Marco playing on the fire escape 3 days ago, his small hands gripping the railing, while Elena stood behind him, laughing at something he'd said. And in the bottom corner, written in red ink, "We've been watching." Dante's grip tightened on the photo until it crumpled. "When did this arrive?" "An hour ago. Left on the steps of the Rossi Social Club. No cameras caught who dropped it." Luca's voice was tight with controlled anger. "Boss, they know where you are. They know about the kid." Dante's mind raced, calculating how much time they had, what the Volkovs wanted, why they hadn't already moved. A photograph was a message, a threat, but also a negotiation. They wanted something. "Wake everyone," Dante said, his voice cold and flat. "Full lockdown. No one in or out without my say. And get Elena and Marco ready to move." Luca nodded and disappeared down the hallway. Dante stood alone in the dim light of early morning, staring at the photo, at his son's bright smile captured by an enemy's lens. 5 years ago, the Bratva had taken Sofia from him. Now they wanted to take Marco too. But Dante Russo didn't lose twice. Elena knew something was wrong the moment she saw Dante's face. He came into the bedroom where she and Marco were just waking up, his expression carved from stone, and crouched down beside the bed. "Marco," he said gently, "I need you to go with Luca for a little bit, okay? He's going to show you something cool." Marco's eyes lit up. "What kind of cool?" "You'll see." Dante forced a smile, ruffling the boy's hair. "Go on." Marco scrambled out of bed and ran to Luca, who was waiting in the doorway with a forced cheerfulness that didn't reach his eyes. The moment they were gone, Elena stood, her arms wrapping protectively around herself. "What happened?" Dante pulled the photograph from his pocket and handed it to her. The color drained from her face. Her scarred hand flew to her mouth, and for a moment, Dante thought she might collapse. But she didn't. She straightened, her fear hardening into something sharper. "They found us," she whispered. "I knew they would. I knew—" "Elena," Dante's voice cut through her rising panic. "Look at me." She did, her eyes wide and wet. "I'm not letting them take him," Dante said, each word a vow. "Do you understand? They can send 1,000 photographs. They can burn this whole city down. I don't care. Marco stays safe." "How?" Her voice cracked. "How do you fight people who've been hunting us for 5 years? Who killed your wife? Who won't stop until—" "Because now they're not just fighting you." Dante's gaze was iron. "They're fighting me, and I don't lose." Elena wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to, but she'd seen what these men were capable of. She'd watched Sofia die in her arms, heard the way the Bratva talked about erasing problems, about making examples. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice small. "We move, now. Different location. Somewhere they can't track." Dante was already pulling out his phone, sending rapid-fire texts. "And then I'm going to find out who's been feeding them information." Elena's stomach dropped. "You think someone on your side?" "I don't think. I know." Dante's jaw tightened. "No one knew about this location except my inner circle. Which means someone talked, or someone's been bought." The betrayal in his voice was a living thing, sharp and bitter. Elena had learned enough about Dante's world to know that loyalty was currency, and betrayal was a death sentence. Dante, she said quietly, if you go after them, if you start a war, Marco will be right in the middle of it. He already is. Dante met her eyes. The only question is whether I meet them on my terms or theirs. They moved within the hour. Dante brought them to a warehouse in Greenpoint, one he owned through a shell company even his own people didn't know about. It was industrial, cold, but fortified like a bunker. Elena held Marco close the entire ride, whispering reassurances she didn't believe herself. Inside, Dante's most trusted men, 4 of them, hand-picked and loyal to the bone, set up a perimeter. No one spoke unless necessary. Everyone understood what was at stake. Marco, oblivious to the danger, thought it was an adventure. Are we playing hide and seek? He asked, eyes bright. Something like that, Elena said, forcing a smile. A big game. Cool. Marco ran off to explore the warehouse, and Elena watched him go, her heart breaking at how easily children believed the world was safe. Dante was across the room, speaking in low tones with Luca and another man Elena didn't recognize. She caught fragments of the conversation. Surveillance, informants, the Volkovs' last known location. It was a language she didn't fully understand, but she knew enough to be afraid. When Dante finally came over, his face was unreadable. There's something I need to tell you, he said. Elena's stomach twisted. What? The Bratva didn't just take that photo to threaten us. They took it to confirm something. He paused, his jaw working. My wife, Sophia, she wasn't just killed because of her brother's betrayal. She was killed because she was pregnant. Because they wanted to make sure Volkov's enemies didn't have an heir. Elena's breath caught. But they didn't know she'd already given birth. Right. Which means when they find out Marco exists, they won't just come for him. They'll come for everyone. You, me, anyone who's protected him. Dante's voice dropped. This isn't about revenge anymore, Elena. It's about survival. Then what do we do? She whispered. We give them what they want. Elena's blood ran cold. What? Not Marco, Dante said quickly, seeing the terror in her eyes. Me. They want to draw me out, force me into a position where I'm vulnerable. So, I'm going to give them that. I'm going to meet them. That's suicide, Elena hissed, grabbing his arm. They'll kill you. Maybe. Dante's gaze was steady. But while they're focused on me, you and Marco will be gone, out of the city, out of the country if we have to. Somewhere they'll never find you. No! Elena's voice shook with fury. No! You don't get to do that. You don't get to sacrifice yourself after everything. After he just found you. After we... She stopped, choking on words she hadn't meant to say. Dante's expression softened, just a fraction. Elena? He needs you, she said desperately. Marco needs his father. Not a ghost, not a story. You. And he'll have me. Dante reached out, cupping her face with a gentleness that didn't belong to a man like him. But only if I end this. Only if I make sure the Volkovs can't ever touch him again. Tears streamed down Elena's face. There has to be another way. There isn't. But Dante was wrong, because the Volkovs didn't wait for him to come to them. They came first. It happened fast. Too fast. One of Dante's men went down without a sound. A clean shot through the window. Then the lights went out. Shouts. Gunfire. The warehouse erupted into chaos. Elena! Dante's voice cut through the darkness. Get Marco! Now! Elena ran, her heart pounding, her only thought finding her son. She found him huddled behind a stack of crates, eyes wide with fear, but blessedly unharmed. Mama! Shh! We have to go. Now! She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the back exit, the one Dante had shown her when they'd arrived. But before they could reach it, a figure stepped out of the shadows. Tall, scarred, holding a gun. Elena Moretti, the man said in a thick Russian accent. We've been looking for you for a very long time. Elena pushed Marco behind her, her body a shield. Please, he's just a child. He's innocent. The man smiled, cold and empty. No child of Dante Russo is innocent. And that's when Elena understood. They knew. They'd always known. This had never been about confirmation. It had been about waiting for the right moment, for Dante to care, for there to be something worth taking. Where is he? The man asked, stepping closer. Where is Russo? Right here. Dante emerged from the darkness like death itself, his gun trained on the Russian's head. Around him, his men closed in, weapons drawn. The Bratva soldiers who'd stormed the warehouse were outnumbered, outgunned, and trapped. But the Russian just laughed. You think this is over, Russo? You think killing me changes anything? No, Dante said coldly, but it's a start. The shot echoed through the warehouse, and then everything moved at once. When the smoke cleared and the bodies were counted, Dante stood in the center of the carnage, blood on his hands and rage in his eyes. But Marco and Elena were safe. Luca had gotten them out through the back, just as Dante had planned. They were already in a car, speeding toward a private airstrip where a plane was waiting. Dante's phone buzzed. A text from Luca. They're safe, heading to the plane now. Dante exhaled, the tension in his shoulders finally releasing. But the war wasn't over. The Russian had been right about one thing. This was only the beginning. The Volkovs would come again, and again, until someone ended it. And Dante knew, with brutal certainty, that someone had to be him. The plane was small, private, the kind that didn't ask questions and didn't keep records. Elena sat by the window with Marco asleep in her lap, his small body finally relaxed after hours of fear. She stroked his hair absently, her mind 1,000 miles away. Or rather, back in that warehouse, back with Dante. She'd watched through the car window as they pulled away, seen him standing in the doorway surrounded by his men, blood on his shirt and murder in his eyes. He'd looked at her one last time before Luca hit the gas, and in that look was everything he hadn't said. I'll find you. I'll finish this. Wait for me. But Elena had learned not to trust promises made in the dark. The plane had been in the air for 2 hours when Luca finally sat down across from her, his expression unreadable. Where are we going? Elena asked quietly, careful not to wake Marco. Palermo, Luca said. Sicily. Dante owns a villa there. Off the books. No one knows about it except family. Elena's chest tightened. Family. The word felt foreign and impossibly fragile. And after that, you wait. Dante will handle the Volkovs. And when it's done, he'll come for you. What if he doesn't? The words slipped out before she could stop them. What if they kill him? Luca's jaw tightened. Then I'll make sure you and the boy are taken care of. You'll never want for anything. That's the promise Dante made me swear before we left. Elena closed her eyes, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. Even now, even in the middle of a war, Dante was thinking about them, protecting them. He's going to survive this, Luca said, and there was a certainty in his voice that Elena desperately wanted to believe. Dante Russo doesn't know how to lose, especially not now. Not when he has something worth coming home to. 3 days later, Brooklyn. The meeting took place in a restaurant that had been closed for renovations for the past 6 months. It was neutral territory, chosen by intermediaries who had no loyalty to either side. Just a table, 2 chairs, and the weight of 5 years of blood between them. Dante arrived first, flanked by Luca and 2 others. He wore a black suit, no tie, and carried nothing but the cold certainty that this ended tonight. Across from him sat Alexei Volkov himself, patriarch of the Bratva, the man who'd ordered Sophia's death, the man who'd haunted Elena and Marco for half a decade. He was older than Dante expected, gray at the temples, lines around his eyes, but his gaze was sharp, calculating, and utterly without remorse. "Dante Russo," Alexei said, his English accented but precise. "You've caused me a great deal of trouble." "Good," Dante replied flatly. "That was the point." Alexei smiled, cold and thin. "I admire your rage. It's pure, honest, but it's also pointless. You cannot win this war. Even if you kill me, my sons will come. My cousins, my soldiers. We are endless." "Maybe," Dante said, "but I only need to kill enough of you to make a point." "And what point is that? That the boy is off limits?" Dante leaned forward, his voice dropping to something deadly. "You want revenge for Sophia's brother? Fine, come for me. But the child stays out of it. He's innocent. He's 5 years old. And if you or anyone in your organization touches him, I will burn everything you've built to the ground and salt the earth where it stood." Alexei studied him for a long moment, then laughed, a dry, rattling sound. "You think I care about one child? About your bastard son?" "I think you care about survival," Dante said coldly. "And I think you're smart enough to know that I'm not bluffing." The room went silent. Alexei's smile faded. "You're willing to die for this boy?" "Every day." Another long silence. Then Alexei leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Your wife, Sophia, she was collateral. Her brother stole from me, disappeared, left her to pay his debt. It was business. Nothing personal." "It was personal the moment you put your hands on her." "Perhaps." Alexei shrugged. "But she's dead. Her brother is dead. The debt is paid. There is no reason for this to continue." "There is," Dante said. "As long as the boy is a target, there's a reason." Alexei was quiet for a moment, then he did something unexpected. He smiled. "You remind me of myself," he said. 30 years ago, when I had something worth protecting." He stood slowly, buttoning his jacket. "Very well, Russo. The boy is off limits. You have my word." Dante didn't move. "Your word means nothing to me." "Then take this." Alexei pulled a ring from his finger, gold, engraved with the Volkov family crest, and placed it on the table. "This is my bond. Anyone who comes for the child will answer to me. And I promise you, my justice is harsher than yours." Dante stared at the ring, every instinct screaming that this was a trick. But Alexei's eyes held something Dante recognized. Not kindness, not mercy, but pragmatism. The cold calculation of a man who knew when a war cost more than it was worth. "Why?" Dante asked. "Because I'm tired," Alexei said simply. "And because you're right." "The boy is innocent. I've killed enough innocents in my life. I don't need one more ghost." He turned to leave, then paused. "Besides, Russo, you would have won, eventually, and I'd rather have peace than a Pyrrhic victory." And then he was gone, his men following like shadows. Luca stepped forward, disbelief written across his face. "Boss, you can't actually trust—" "I don't," Dante said, pocketing the ring. "But I'll take the leverage. And if he breaks his word, I'll kill him myself. 1 week later, Palermo, Sicily. The villa sat on a hillside overlooking the sea, surrounded by olive groves and wildflowers that bloomed in defiance of the late autumn chill. It was beautiful in a way that felt almost unreal after the gray streets of Brooklyn. Elena stood on the terrace, watching Marco chase butterflies through the garden. His laughter carried on the Mediterranean breeze. For the first time in 5 years, she wasn't looking over her shoulder, wasn't counting exits, wasn't planning the next escape. She was just breathing. "Mama, look!" Marco held up a yellow butterfly that had landed on his finger. "It likes me." Elena smiled, her heart full and breaking at the same time. "Of course it does. You're very likable." "Do you think Daddy will come soon?" Marco asked, his voice hopeful. "I don't know, sweetheart. He promised." "I know." But promises, Elena had learned, were fragile things in Dante's world. Easily broken by bullets or betrayal or the simple, brutal reality that some fights couldn't be won. She was about to call Marco inside for lunch when she heard it, the sound of a car on the gravel drive. Her heart stopped. She moved instinctively, putting herself between Marco and the sound, her mind already calculating how fast she could get him inside, where the nearest exit was, how long it would take to... And then she saw him. Dante. He stepped out of the black car, looking exhausted and battered and impossibly alive. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in her chest cracked wide open. "Daddy!" Marco's shriek of joy shattered the stillness. He ran down the terrace steps, his small legs pumping as fast as they could go. Dante dropped to his knees just in time to catch him, wrapping his arms around the boy like he was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. Marco buried his face in Dante's neck, his small hands gripping his father's shirt. "You came back," Marco whispered. "You promised, and you came back." "Always," Dante said, his voice rough and raw. "I'll always come back." Elena walked down the steps slowly, her legs shaking, her vision blurred with tears she didn't bother hiding. When she reached them, Dante looked up at her, and in his eyes was everything: exhaustion, relief, gratitude, and something deeper that neither of them had words for yet. "It's over," he said quietly. "The Volkovs, the threat, it's done." "How?" Elena's voice trembled. "How did you—" "I made a deal, and I took insurance." He pulled the Volkov ring from his pocket, showing it to her. "They won't come for Marco. They won't come for you. And if they do, I'll know." Elena stared at the ring, then at Dante, then at Marco still clinging to his father like he'd never let go. And slowly, carefully, she let herself believe it. They were safe. After 5 years of running, of fear, of looking over her shoulder, they were finally safe. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dante stood, lifting Marco into his arms, and reached out his free hand to her. "Now we figure out how to be a family." Elena took his hand, her scarred palm against his, and let him pull her close. The three of them stood there on the Sicilian hillside, battered and broken and impossibly whole, while the sun dipped toward the sea and painted the sky gold. "I don't know how to do this," Elena admitted. "Any of this." "Neither do I," Dante said. "But we'll learn. Together." Marco yawned against Dante's shoulder, already half asleep from the excitement and sunshine. "Can we stay here? I like the butterflies." Dante looked at Elena, a question in his eyes. She smiled, real and unguarded for the first time in what felt like forever. "Yeah, we can stay." 2 months later, the villa had transformed from a safe house into a home. Marco had his own room now, filled with toys and books Dante had shipped from everywhere: New York, Rome, London. He had a tutor who came 3 times a week and taught him Italian and English and mathematics. He had a garden where he planted tomatoes and peppers and herbs that Elena used when she cooked. He had a life, a real, safe, beautiful life. And so did Elena. She'd started painting again, something she hadn't done since before Sophia died. The terrace had become her studio, filled with canvases and brushes and the scent of turpentine mixing with sea air. Dante had commissioned her first piece without telling her, a portrait of Marco that now hung in the villa's main room. "You're talented," he'd said when he first saw it. "Why did you stop?" "Because I was too busy surviving," she'd replied. "Then don't stop again." Dante came and went, handling business that Elena didn't ask about and he didn't volunteer. But he always came back, always kept his promises. And slowly, carefully, the walls between them began to crumble. One evening, after Marco was asleep, Elena found Dante on the terrace, staring out at the sea. "You're thinking about her," Elena said softly. Dante didn't deny it. "Sometimes. I think about what she'd say if she could see this. See him. She'd be grateful," Elena said. "For you, for Marco, for all of it." "Would she?" Dante's voice was rough. "I failed her, Elena. I couldn't save her." "No," Elena said firmly, stepping beside him. "But you saved your son. You saved me." "And you gave Marco something she wanted more than anything. A father who would fight for him, who would love him, who would never stop protecting him." Dante turned to look at her, and in the moonlight, his expression was raw and open in a way she'd never seen before. "She asked me to take care of him," Elena continued, her voice breaking. "But you're the one who made it possible. You gave us a home, a life, safety. You gave us everything." "You did the hard part," Dante said. "You kept him alive when I couldn't. You loved him when I didn't even know he existed. You were his mother in every way that mattered." Tears streamed down Elena's face. "I don't want to stop being his mother." "You won't," Dante promised, reaching up to brush the tears from her cheeks. "Ever. You're not losing him, Elena. You're gaining me." And then he kissed her. Soft, careful, a question and an answer all at once. When they pulled apart, Elena rested her forehead against his, her scarred hand in his, their breath mingling in the cool night air. "I'm scared," she whispered. "So am I." "What if we mess this up? Then we fix it." Dante's voice was steady, certain. "Together." And Elena, who'd spent 5 years running from the past and fearing the future, finally let herself live in the present. 6 months later, Marco's 6th birthday was celebrated under the olive trees, with a cake Elena had baked and decorations Dante had insisted on, even though Marco said he was too old for balloons. Luca and a few of Dante's most trusted men had flown in for the occasion, bringing gifts and laughter and stories that made Marco's eyes go wide. The villa was full of life, of warmth, of something that looked impossibly like happiness. When the sun began to set and the guests began to leave, Marco climbed into Dante's lap, exhausted but grinning. "Best birthday ever," he declared. "Good," Dante said, ruffling his hair. "You deserve it." "Daddy? Yeah? Are you and Mama gonna get married?" Elena, who'd been cleaning up plates nearby, froze. Dante's gaze found hers, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Would you like that?" Dante asked Marco. "Yeah," Marco said enthusiastically. "Then we'd be a real family." "We're already a real family," Elena said softly, coming to sit beside them. "But," she looked at Dante, her heart in her throat, "maybe someday if your daddy asks nicely. Dante's smile widened. Noted. Marco yawned, leaning against Dante's chest. I'm glad you found us, Daddy. Me too, kid, Dante said, his voice thick with emotion. Me too. And as the Sicilian sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the three of them sat together under the olive trees, no longer running, no longer afraid, no longer alone. They'd been born from tragedy and forged in fire, but they'd become something beautiful, a family. Sometimes the family we're meant to have finds us in the most unexpected ways. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed the direction of your life? A person, a decision, a twist of fate that led you somewhere you never imagined? Share your story in the comments below. Rain painted the city silver when she stumbled into his path, but in the end, it was love that painted their future gold. The ghosts of the past still lingered, but they no longer ruled. Because Dante Russo had learned something more powerful than vengeance, more lasting than empire. That family wasn't built on blood or certainty, but on protection, trust, and the courage to believe in fragile, fierce things. And in a villa on a Sicilian hillside, surrounded by olive trees and butterfly-filled gardens, that family finally had the chance to grow. Thank you for watching this story until the end. If this story touched your heart, subscribe and click on the next video. It is darker, deeper, and even more unforgettable. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a new story, and comment your country or city. Your support helps us create more contents like this.